I used to believe love made people honest. Evan used to say that to me, smiling, touching the ring on my finger. We don't lie here, he said. This house is built on truth. I believed him. I believed every word. This place is huge, my sister once joked. Are you sure it's not too much? It's perfect, I told her. It's our future. Tonight, the mansion felt quiet. Too quiet. I called out, Evan? No answer. I heard voices upstairs, laughing. I smiled, thinking he had friends over. I followed the sound down the hallway. My heels clicked softly. I stopped when I reached his office door. It was half closed. I swear, Evan said, laughing. She has no idea. A woman laughed with him. You're awful. I froze. My hand hovered near the door. I mean it, he continued. She thinks I'm working late. She thinks this ring means forever. My chest tightened. I whispered, Evan, but the sound stayed stuck in my throat. The woman said, and she paid for half of this place, right? More than half, Evan replied. And she still thanks me for it. They laughed again. Loud. Careless. My heart slammed against my ribs. I pressed my palm to the wall to stay upright. He doesn't mean it, I told myself. He's joking. Inside the room, the woman said, what if she finds out? Evan scoffed. She won't. She trusts me. She always does. I felt something crack. Trust. That word burned. She's sweet, he added. But sweet women are easy. I swallowed a sob. My legs shook. I wanted to burst in, to scream, to throw the ring at his face. Instead, I stood there. The woman asked, do you love her at all? There was a pause. Then Evan said, love is convenient. I closed my eyes. My fingers curled into fists. I should go, the woman said. Stay, Evan replied softly. She won't be home for another hour. I looked down at my watch. He was right. I wasn't supposed to be home. I backed away slowly. My breath came out uneven. Every step felt unreal. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall. Don't cry, I whispered to myself. Not yet. I slipped off the ring and held it tight. The diamond cut into my skin. Downstairs, I grabbed my bag. My phone buzzed. A text from Evan. Working late. Love you. I stared at the screen. I typed back, love you too. I stayed still for a long moment, listening to my heart break in quiet pieces. You trusted him, I said softly, tasting the truth. I remembered every promise, every plan, every night I waited alone. This isn't love, I told myself. This is a lesson. My hands stopped shaking. My tears dried. I lifted my chin. Somewhere upstairs, Evan laughed again. I didn't flinch. I knew I would leave quietly, learn everything, and decide when to speak. Not tonight. Not while he felt safe. I took one last look at the stairs. Goodbye, I whispered, not to him, but to the girl who believed lies. Then I walked out, knowing my life had just split in two. And nothing would ever be the same again. That I woke up telling myself, you imagined it. I said it out loud. You were tired. Evan kissed my cheek in the kitchen and said, morning, babe. I smiled and answered, morning. My voice sounded normal. Inside, I was screaming. At breakfast, he said, we're having dinner with a consultant tonight. I asked, a consultant? He nodded. Lila. She's helping with the expansion. I said, that's great. Even though my stomach twisted, I'd love to meet her. At dinner, Lila arrived wearing red. She smiled at Evan first, then at me. You must be her, she said. I replied, I must be. Evan laughed. See? She's funny. Lila said, you talk about her a lot. I looked at him. You do. He answered quickly, of course. I watched his hand brush her arm. She didn't move away. I noticed everything. The way she leaned closer. The way he avoided my eyes. So, Lila said, how long have you two been together? 6 years, I answered. Evan added, she's very emotional about anniversaries. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. My laugh sounded sharp. I like memories, I said. Lila smiled. Memories are dangerous. Evan raised his glass.
To business, he said.
I raised mine. To honesty. He didn't meet my gaze. During dinner, Evan joked, "Women feel too much. That's their weakness." A friend said, "Or their charm." Evan shrugged. "Depends on the woman." Laughter filled the table. I felt small. I said nothing. I cut my food into tiny pieces I didn't eat. Lila leaned toward me. "You're quiet." I replied, "I'm listening." She said softly, "That's important." Evan said, "She listens too much." I smiled again. My face hurt. My chest burned. In the car later, I said, "She seems confident." Evan said, "Don't start." I wasn't starting, I replied. I was talking. He sighed. "You're overthinking. You always do." I nodded. "You're right."
He reached for my hand.
I let him. I stared out the window and told myself, "Don't cry." At home, he went upstairs. I stayed in the living room. I whispered, "He cheated." Saying it felt like swallowing glass. I remembered the laughter behind the door. I remembered his voice calling me easy. I looked at my reflection and said, "You will not break here." Upstairs, Evan called, "Coming to bed?" "In a minute," I answered. I stood alone, breathing slowly. "Smile," I told myself. "Survive." I wiped my eyes. No tears fell. Not yet. I promised myself, he won't see me fall. I straightened my shoulders and walked upstairs, wearing the same smile he expected, while my world burned quietly inside me. I waited until the door closed behind the guests. Then I said, "We need to talk." Evan didn't look surprised. He leaned against the counter and said, "About what?" I replied, "About her." He laughed. "You're still on that?" I said, "I heard you." He tilted his head. "You weren't supposed to." I asked, "How long?" He shrugged. "Long enough." My voice shook. "Did you ever love me?" He smiled like I told a joke. "Love is a benefit, not a requirement." I whispered, "You cheated on me." He nodded. "And," I said, "you laughed about it." He crossed his arms. "You're too sensitive." I said, "I built this life with you." He answered, "You enjoyed it." I asked, "Is the house ours?" He paused, then said, "It's mine." I stared. "Mine," he repeated. "I paid the lawyers." I said, "You let me believe," he cut in. "You never ask." My chest hurt. "So, what am I to you?" I asked. He replied, "Comfort." Silence filled the room. I grabbed my bag. He said, "Where are you going?" I answered, "Anywhere without you." He laughed again. "You'll be back." I walked out. Outside, my legs failed. I sat on the curb and cried until my throat burned. I called Mara and said, "I broke." She replied, "Come here." At her place, she wrapped me in a blanket and said, "You're safe." I whispered, "I feel stupid." She said, "You were in love." I cried myself to sleep thinking, never again. Something cold settled in my chest, and I knew I would survive. I woke before dawn. Mara sat beside me and said, "He doesn't get to define you." I answered, "He already did." She shook her head. "Only if you let him." I said, "He took everything." She replied, "No, he showed you who he is." I stared at the wall and said, "I trusted him." Mara said, "That's not a crime." I asked, "Why do I feel empty?" She said, "Because you're grieving a lie." I swallowed and said, "He called me comfort." She snapped, "You are not furniture." I almost laughed. I said, "I feel weak." She answered, "You survived tonight." I whispered, "Barely." She said, "Barely is enough." My phone buzzed. Evan texted, "You'll regret this." I showed her. She said, "Block him." I hesitated. "Not yet," I replied. "I need to see him fall." She studied me and said, "There it is." I asked, "What?" She answered, "Your spine." I lay back down. My tears stopped. I said, "I won't beg." Mara said, "Good." I closed my eyes and thought, he broke my heart, not my will. Sleep came heavy. I felt small, but I felt solid. When morning light touched my face, I knew something inside me had changed, and it would never soften for him again. I stayed awake longer, listening to the city. I said softly, "I mattered before him." Mara replied, "You matter now." I breathed in and said, "I will rebuild." She answered, "Step by step." I nodded. My voice steadied. "I won't disappear." She smiled. "That's the girl I know." I held the blanket tight and whispered, "Tonight broke me." Mara said, "No, it woke you." I believed her. I turned on my side and said, "I'm scared." Mara answered, "So was I once." I asked, "Did it pass?" She said, "It turned into strength." I closed my eyes and said, "Then let it come." The night ended quietly, but I knew my old life was over, and I would never walk back into it again without losing myself forever. I stopped feeling pain and started feeling nothing. Mara asked, "Did he call?" I shook my head and said, "He blocked my card instead." My phone buzzed with a bank alert.
Declined.
I laughed and said, "That was fast." Mara frowned. "He's cutting you off." I replied, "He already did." I scrolled through messages. Group chats were silent. Invitations vanished. I said, "Our friends are gone." Mara said, "They were his." I answered, "I thought they were ours." I remembered Evan saying, "Quit your job. Focus on us." I remembered replying, "Are you sure?" He said, "I'll take care of you." I told Mara, I believed that. She snapped. That wasn't love. That was control. I said, "I helped him build everything." She asked, "Did he ever thank you?" I went quiet. My phone rang. I said, "Hello?" A friend whispered, "I can't talk to you anymore." I asked, "Why?" She said, "Evan asked me not to." The line went dead. I stared at the screen. "I don't exist," I said. Mara replied, "You do. You're just inconvenient to them." She pushed a card into my hand. "Call Jonah." I asked, "Who?" She said, "A lawyer. He helped me once." I sighed. "I don't want to fight." She said, "You need to understand." I called. Jonah answered, "This is Jonah." I said, "I don't know if I need a lawyer." He replied, "Then you're in the right place." I told him everything. He listened. He didn't interrupt. Finally, he asked, "Do you have copies of anything?" I said, "Emails, designs, contracts." He said, "Good." I laughed bitterly. "They're probably useless." He said, "Probably isn't a fact." We met the next day. Jonah looked at papers and said, "You signed this?" I nodded. Evan said it was standard. Jonah asked, "Did you read it?" I whispered, "No, he didn't judge me." He said, "You trusted him." I swallowed. "That makes me stupid." He shook his head. "It makes you human." He pointed to a line and said, "This doesn't remove you." I leaned closer.
What?
He said, "Your name is still tied to the business concept." My heart skipped. "So he lied?" Jonah replied, "Yes." Mara squeezed my hand. Jonah continued, "He also missed payments." I asked, "On what?" He said, "Credit tied to your name." I felt sick. "So he used me." Jonah said, "And left a trail." I whispered, "He always said he handled money better." Jonah replied, "People who say that usually don't." I almost smiled. That night, I sat alone and said out loud, I gave up everything. I remembered late nights, unpaid work, smiling beside him. I said, I wasn't weak. Mara answered from the doorway, "No." Jonah's calm voice echoed in my head. "You trusted." I felt something shift. Not hope yet, but clarity. I looked at my empty phone and said, he wanted me small. Mara replied, and failed. I breathed in slowly. I was never nobody. She smiled. You just forgot who you were. I nodded. For the first time since I left, my chest felt lighter. I wasn't broken. I was waking up. I spread the papers across the table and said, tell me the truth. Jonah replied, I always do. Mara crossed her arms and said, start talking. Jonah tapped a document and asked, did you design this? I nodded. Every line. He said, your name is still attached. I frowned. That's impossible. He looked at me. It's careless, not impossible. My stomach flipped. He said he removed me. Jonah answered he didn't. I whispered, so he lied again. Mara said, he never stopped. Jonah flipped another page. This concept, he said, was registered under your old business name. I blinked. I forgot about that. He replied, he didn't. I laughed softly. He always remembered what helped him. Jonah asked, did you sign this transfer? I shook my head. No, he said. Then he used it without consent. My hands shook. That's illegal. Jonah nodded. Yes. Silence sat heavy between us. I said, I could fight. Mara said, you should. I hesitated. Or I could walk away. Jonah asked, would that give you peace? I thought about Evan's smile. I said, no. Jonah leaned back. Then don't walk. I rubbed my temples. I don't want to become like him. Mara snapped, standing up isn't cruelty. Jonah added, it's correction. My phone buzzed. I opened social media. Evan had posted a photo. He stood in the mansion, arm around Lila. The caption read, New Beginnings. I stared at the room behind them. That was my layout, I said. Mara leaned closer. That couch was your idea. Jonah said calmly, that matters. I felt heat rise in my chest. He's parading her in my work. Mara said, he wants you to see. I whispered, and it worked. Another photo appeared. Lila smiled on the staircase I designed. I said, she's wearing my color palette. Mara cursed. Jonah said, focus. I snapped my phone shut. I won't cry. Mara said, good. Jonah asked, what do you want? I answered, control. He nodded. Then patience. I looked at the papers again. How long before he notices? Jonah replied, he already underestimated you. I asked, can we prove this? He said, yes. Mara smiled. He's not untouchable. I swallowed. He always said he was. Jonah replied, people who brag usually hide cracks. I paced and said, if I fight, he'll laugh. Mara said, let him. Jonah added, quiet wins scare louder. I stopped pacing. No messages, I said. No confrontations. Jonah smiled faintly. Strategic silence. Mara said, I like her already. That night, I sat alone and opened the photos again. My chest hurt, but my hands were steady. I said out loud, I won't scream. I remembered begging once. Never again. I whispered, I will wait. The humiliation burned, but it sharpened me. Evan thought I was finished. I smiled to myself and said, you built your lie on my work. I closed my laptop and added, now I'll take it back. I didn't feel weak. I felt focused. Quiet. Ready. The apartment smelled like dust and cheap cleaner. I dropped my bag and said, this is it. Mara looked around and said, it's yours. I sat on the floor and replied, that's new. The couch was secondhand. The table wobbled. I slept on a mattress on the floor and told myself, it's temporary. At night, the silence was loud. I stared at the ceiling and whispered, don't fail again. My phone buzzed. A message from Naomi. Saw the rumors. Are you okay? I typed back, can we talk? She replied, always. We met for coffee. Naomi smiled and said, you look tired. I answered, I am. She leaned in. Tell me everything. I told her. She listened, then said, your brand idea was solid. I laughed. He said it was childish. She scoffed. He needed you small. I asked, you really think it can work? She said, if you let it. I hesitated. I'm scared. Naomi nodded. Good. Fear means you care. I said, I don't have much money. She replied, you have ownership. That word felt heavy. I said, I forgot how that feels. She smiled. Then remember. We worked late nights at my table. Naomi said, this logo is yours. I asked, not too bold. She answered, you're allowed to be bold. I said, what if I fail? She looked at me and said, then you fail forward. I swallowed. He'll laugh. She shrugged. Let him choke on it. He didn't wait long. Evan posted again. A tweet mocking fake entrepreneurs living off past favors. I stared at it. My hands shook. Naomi said, don't reply. I asked, what if he wins? She replied, silence isn't losing. I put my phone down. Okay. I meant it. Days blurred together. Cheap noodles. Late edits. Doubt knocking in my chest. I said out loud, I can't do this. Naomi replied, you already are. I checked our progress and whispered, this was my idea. Naomi grinned. And now it's your future. One night, I caught my reflection in the dark screen. I said, who are you now? No answer came, but I didn't panic. I opened my laptop instead. I said, I choose me. The words felt strange.
Right.
Another post from Evan appeared. A photo of him celebrating. I muted his name. I told myself, I don't need to watch him. Naomi nodded. Good boundary. I breathed easier. Weeks passed. A small client signed on. I stared at the email and said, they chose me. Naomi clapped. Of course they did. I smiled without forcing it. For the first time in months, the smile stayed. That night, alone, I sat on my floor and said, I'm still standing. I thought about the mansion, the lies, the loss. Then I thought about this room. This is mine, I whispered. Not borrowed. Not gifted. Earned. I lay down and closed my eyes. I'm not rebuilding to prove him wrong, I said softly. I'm rebuilding because I exist. The fear didn't vanish, but it shrank. In its place, something steady grew. I believed in myself again. Not as someone's partner. As my own person. I heard it first from a friend who shouldn't have called me. She said, I don't know why I'm telling you this. I replied, then don't. She whispered, investors are leaving Evan. I stayed quiet. She added, he's angry all the time. I said, that sounds familiar. She hung up fast. Later, Naomi showed me her phone and said, look. I saw comments under Evan's post. People asked questions. Some were angry. Naomi said, that's not good for him. I answered, I'm not celebrating. She studied me. You don't look surprised. I shrugged. Lies expire. Mara called that night and said, you hear about Lila? I asked, what about her? Mara laughed. She yelled at him at an event. I pictured it. I said, publicly? Mara replied, very. I exhaled slowly. I'm not involved. Mara said, I know. She paused. But karma is. I met Jonah the next day. He slid a folder across the table and said, things are shifting. I asked, how bad? He answered, bad enough to matter. I leaned back. What does that mean for me? Jonah said, opportunity. I frowned. I don't want revenge. He nodded. This isn't revenge. I asked, then what is it? He replied, correction. He pointed to a document and said, his company violated terms tied to your work. I said, because he rushed. Jonah said, because he underestimated you. I swallowed. If I move now, it'll hurt him. Jonah replied, it will restore you. I closed my eyes. I'm tired. Jonah said gently. Justice isn't loud. That night, I sat alone and said, I could walk away. The room didn't answer. I imagined peace. I imagined Evan laughing again. I said, I don't want to be cruel. Then I said, I don't want to be erased.
My voice shook.
Is choosing myself wrong? My phone buzzed. Evan posted a rant. He blamed partners. He blamed timing. He blamed everyone. I said, still not me. I turned the screen off. The next morning, Jonah called. Are you ready? I asked, for what? He said, to file. I stared at the wall. Will it ruin him? Jonah answered. He started that fire. I whispered, I didn't want this. Jonah said, you didn't cause it either. I thought about nights I stayed quiet. I thought about the ring cutting my skin. I said, okay. Jonah replied, that's all I needed. After the call, my hands trembled. I pressed them together. I'm not angry, I told myself. I'm awake. Naomi texted, you good? I replied, I'm choosing myself. She sent back, proud of you. Days passed. More rumors surfaced. Evan stopped posting. Lila vanished. I watched without smiling. I said out loud, I'm not watching him fall. I paused. I'm standing up. When Jonah confirmed the filing, he said, this changes things. I answered, for both of us. He said, power is moving. I closed my eyes and breathed. Let it move, I whispered. That night, I slept without fear. Not because I won, but because I acted. I understood then that karma doesn't knock. It creeps. And this time, it wasn't coming for me. His message appeared at noon.
Hey.
Long time. I stared at it and said out loud, no, it hasn't. I didn't reply. An hour later, another text came.
Hope you're doing okay.
I laughed softly. Now you care? Mara glanced at my phone and said, don't answer. I nodded. I won't. That evening, my phone buzzed again. We should talk. I typed back about what? The dots appeared instantly.
Us.
I paused. There is no us, I whispered, but I sent fine. He replied, tomorrow? I said, public place. He agreed too quickly. At the cafe, he stood when he saw me. You look good, he said. I replied, I know. His smile faltered. He said, you've changed. I sat down and answered, you didn't notice before. He cleared his throat. I was busy. I asked, with Lila?
He winced.
She left. I nodded. I heard. He leaned forward. Things are falling apart. I sipped my coffee. I know. He frowned. You know? I said, people talk. He said, I didn't expect this. I looked at him and asked, did you expect me to disappear? He avoided my eyes. I thought you'd come back. I smiled. I surprised myself too. He said, I made mistakes. I replied, you made choices. He ran a hand through his hair. I miss you. I tilted my head. You miss comfort. He flinched. That's not fair. I shrugged. Neither was lying. He lowered his voice. I need you. I answered calmly, no, you need control. Silence stretched. He said, you're cold. I replied, I'm clear. He reached for my hand. I pulled it back. Don't, he whispered. I never meant to hurt you. I looked straight at him. You laughed. His face fell. I was scared. I said, so was I. He swallowed. Can we start over? I laughed once. You don't start over with someone you buried. He clenched his jaw. You think you're better than me now? I leaned back. I think I'm free. He stared like he didn't recognize me. You're different, he said again. I nodded. Stronger. He whispered, I regret everything. I replied, regret doesn't rebuild trust. He said, I'll fix it. I stood up. You can't fix me. He stood too. Please. I picked up my bag. Goodbye, Evan. His voice cracked. Don't do this. I met his eyes. I already did. I walked toward the door. My chest was steady. No tears came. Behind me, he said my name. I didn't turn around. I pushed the door open and stepped outside. The air felt lighter. I didn't run. I didn't look back. Later, Mara asked, "How do you feel?" I thought for a moment and said, "Unwanted by him." She smiled. "Good." I nodded. He finally noticed me. I paused. Too late. I walked forward, knowing he watched me leave, and for the first time, his tears were not my responsibility. Jonah called and said, "It's done." I asked, "Define done?" He replied, "Legally, it's yours." I closed my eyes. "The mansion?" He said, "Especially the mansion." My chest tightened.
He won't like that.
Jonah answered, "He didn't protect it." I thanked him and hung up. Mara hugged me and said, "You're shaking." I replied, "I'm not scared." She smiled. "You're ready." I nodded. "I am." When I drove there, my hand stayed steady. The gate opened. I whispered, "I'm back."
Not as his fiancée.
As myself. Inside, Evan stood in the living room. His voice broke. "You can't do this." I said, "I already did." He ran a hand through his hair. "This was my house." I replied, "It was built on my work." He said, "I'll pay you." I shook my head. "You already did." He stepped closer. "Please." I stepped back. "Stop." He whispered. She left. I looked at him. "Who?" He laughed bitterly. "Lila." I nodded once. "I heard." He said, "She said I was toxic." I replied, "She learned faster than I did." His eyes filled. "I need this place." I said calmly, "You needed honesty." I walked through the rooms. Each step hurt and healed at once. Evan followed me and said, "Remember the fireplace?" I answered, "I designed it." He said, "The stairs?" I replied, "My sketch." He stopped talking. Silence suited him now. In the kitchen, he said, "You're taking everything." I looked around. "I'm reclaiming." He said, "You're cruel." I met his eyes. "You laughed at my pain." He flinched. I didn't think. I interrupted. "You never did." My phone buzzed. Naomi texted, "Congratulations." I smiled. Evan noticed. "You're happy," he said. I replied, "I'm free." He grabbed my arm. "Don't do this." I pulled away. "Touch me again, and you'll leave now." He let go. He dropped to the couch and said, "I made a mistake." I stood by the door. "You made many." He said, "I loved you." I answered, "No, you used me." His shoulders shook. "I'm sorry." I said nothing. Outside, movers waited. Papers were signed. Evan watched from the window. I didn't wave. I didn't look back. Mara asked, "How do you feel?" I replied, "Grounded." She said, "That place hurt you." I nodded. "Not anymore." Later, I stood alone in the living room. The echo felt different. I said out loud, "You don't own me." The walls stayed quiet. I smiled. This mansion was once a cage. Now it was proof. Evan texted, "Please talk to me." I didn't reply. I turned off the lights and locked the door. I held the keys tight. "This is mine," I whispered. "Not for revenge. For justice." I walked away knowing the mansion was no longer his shield. It was my prize. I read the headlines and whispered, "So it begins." Mara leaned over my shoulder. "Don't celebrate," she said. I nodded. "I'm not celebrating." The screen showed Evan at a gala, trembling as questions rained down. Reporters asked about missing funds, failed partnerships, and his public fallouts.
He stammered.
I watched quietly. A friend texted, "Everyone's talking." I replied, "I see." The notifications kept coming. People who once laughed with him now avoided his name. My phone buzzed again. Jonah sent a message. "Timing is everything." I typed back, "Understood." I remembered the times I begged for honesty. I remembered the nights I smiled while burning inside. I said softly, "This isn't revenge." Mara asked, "Then what is it?" I stared out the window. Time. Later, Naomi called. "Are you watching?" I said, "I can't look away." She laughed. "That's human." I whispered, "I never wanted this." She replied, "I know." I thought about the mansion, the designs, the endless betrayals. "He's paying the price," I said, without me needing to act. Evan appeared on a live broadcast. He tried to charm, to laugh it off. His words faltered. "I miscalculated," he admitted. The audience murmured. Social media erupted. I said, "Karma doesn't need cruelty." Mara said, "Exactly." I whispered, "It only needs time." I thought about my own journey, the nights alone, rebuilding, reclaiming myself. I realized growth felt heavier than revenge. I typed a post. "Rebuilding takes longer than destroying, but it lasts." Mara smiled. "Perfect." My phone buzzed. Another story showed Evan's closest allies distancing themselves. I said, "People leave when they realize who he is." Naomi replied, "And who you are?" I felt a strange calm. No joy, only clarity. Evan's voice cracked on a video. I didn't mean," I shook my head. "You never do." I didn't click. I didn't respond. I let the moment pass. Mara asked, "Are you okay?" I nodded. "I am." I thought about the woman I used to be, desperate for approval, ready to forgive too soon. I said softly, "I'm not that girl anymore." Naomi added, "You survived the fire." I smiled faintly. Not by revenge, by living. Evening came. I sat in silence. The laughter that once haunted me was gone. The world moved on. I breathed deeply and said, "I am free." Not triumphant, not vindictive, just free. The storm around him didn't need me to stir it. I had already found peace within myself. I closed my eyes. "This is closure." Mara whispered, "And wisdom." I nodded. Growth healed me, not vengeance. The weight lifted. Quiet filled the space where anger had lived. For the first time in years, I smiled. Truly. I unlocked the mansion's front door and whispered, "Welcome home, me." Mara leaned against the wall and said, "It's yours now." I smiled. It always was. Naomi clapped. "Officially?" I nodded. "Officially." The rooms, once heavy with betrayal, now felt like possibility. Jonah appeared with papers. "Everything is in order," he said quietly. I replied, "Thank you." He smiled faintly. I didn't need more words. Silence was enough. I walked through the halls, imagining desks, offices, meeting spaces. I said softly, "This is mine to build." Mara added, "And we're here for you." I hugged her briefly. Naomi whispered, "Let's celebrate later." The first press conference was scheduled in the main hall. Reporters filed in, cameras flashing. I straightened my shoulders and said, "Thank you for coming." Questions came fast. "How does it feel to reclaim the mansion?" I answered, "It's a space for growth, not revenge." They scribbled. Another asked, "Are you satisfied with Evan's situation?" I replied, "My focus is forward, not backward." Mara whispered, "So dignified." I smiled. Naomi nudged me. "Pride looks good on you." I nodded, breathing deeply. Each answer reinforced control, stability, ownership. One reporter asked, "What inspired you?" I said, "Resilience. Mistakes taught me strength." Cameras clicked. Jonah observed silently, a faint, approving glance. After the interviews, Mara raised a glass. To new beginnings. I clinked mine. To reclaiming what was always mine. Naomi said, "To you, finally free." I laughed softly. Freedom tastes better than revenge. Mara smiled. "And it looks good on you." I walked through my office space. My desk was placed. My laptop ready. I set my personal items on the shelf. I whispered, "This is proof. Proof I survived and thrived." Jonah said quietly, "And you did it gracefully." I nodded. Grace doesn't mean weakness. Later, Naomi said, the media will eat this up. I shrugged. Let them. They'll report the truth. Mara added, and you'll control the narrative. I smiled.
Exactly.
Not for him. Not for anyone else. For me. I called Jonah aside. I couldn't have done this without your guidance. He replied, you did the work. I just helped untangle the mess. I said, it's more than that. I own this moment. He nodded, satisfied. That evening, Mara, Naomi, and I toasted on the balcony. The city lights reflected in my eyes. I whispered, I didn't take revenge. I took myself back. Mara said, and that's power. Naomi laughed. True power. I stood alone for a moment, feeling the mansion under my hands, my vision in the air. I said softly, I won. Not because he lost, not because others watched. I won because I found myself. Jonah appeared quietly beside me. Proud. I smiled fully this time.
Yes.
Finally. The night felt calm, alive, and mine. The ruins of my past had become the foundation of my power. I had built something stronger than a house. I had built myself. The doorbell rang, sharp and unexpected. Mara whispered, do you want me to answer? I shook my head.
No.
I can handle this. I walked to the door and opened it. Evan stood there, eyes red. Can we talk? He asked quietly. I stepped aside. You may come in. He entered slowly, glancing around. It's different, he said. I replied, it's mine now. He swallowed. I've made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. I nodded. Yes, you have. His voice shook. I didn't realize. I hurt you this badly. I said, you did. And you laughed while doing it. He lowered his gaze. I'm sorry. Truly. I stayed silent. He looked up. Please, can you forgive me? I inhaled deeply. I forgive you. His eyes widened. Really? I nodded. Not for you. For me. I won't carry this anymore. He swallowed, tears spilling. I never meant. I cut him off gently. I know. That doesn't change what was done. He stepped closer. I want to make things right. I shook my head. You can't. Not with me. You can only change yourself. His shoulders slumped. I deserve this, he whispered. I said, yes. But I don't have to suffer watching you anymore. He said nothing for a long moment. I looked around the mansion, sunlight streaming through the windows. This is light now, I said. Filled with what I choose, not your mistakes. He nodded, unable to meet my gaze. I'll leave, he said finally. I replied, good.
Go.
Heal yourself, not with me. He moved to the door, paused, and whispered, I truly am sorry. I said, I heard you, and I'm free. He left without another word. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, breathing slowly. The sound of the lock clicking into place felt heavier than any barrier he'd ever put between us. I walked through the halls, touching the furniture, the walls, everything I'd rebuilt. This is mine, I whispered. All mine. Mara's words echoed. You reclaimed yourself. I smiled faintly. Naomi's text popped up. Proud of you. I typed back, I finally am. I stood at the large windows in the main hall, sunlight pouring in. The mansion was alive with my choices, my plans, my vision. I whispered softly, no shadows from the past. Only light. I walked through the rooms, each step firm, deliberate. I paused in the center of the living room, taking a deep breath. I survived, I said. I grew. I won myself back. The silence felt warm and steady, unlike the tense quiet of betrayal. I let it fill me. I looked at the front door one last time. Goodbye, I whispered, closing the past behind me. No tears, no longing. Only strength. I turned back toward the mansion, toward the future I'd built, and felt it fully. Alone, but complete, I said, this is freedom. I walked forward, into the sunlight streaming through the windows, every step sure, every heartbeat mine. Peace settled over me like the first calm after a storm. I was finally home,